You're listening to Vote Her In, a collaboration between Two Broads Talking Politics and author Rebecca Sive, where we look at the movement to elect our first woman president. On today's episode, an interview with Lynn Sweet, the Washington bureau chief for the Chicago Sun-Times. Hi everyone, this is Kelly Pollock with the Vote Her In segment, which is a collaboration of Two Broads Talking Politics and author Rebecca Sive, where we look at the movement to elect our first woman president, finally, and a lot of issues that come up around that. So joining me today, as always, is my partner in this venture, Rebecca Sive. Hi, Rebecca.
Hi there, Kelly, and couldn't be happier to be kicking off the new year with you once again. So today, for our listeners, it's a really great show. We're here with Lynn Sweet, the Washington bureau chief of the Chicago Sun-Times, who has covered politics, national, local, state, for decades. And we thought that Lynn could give us the kind of preview that we want to take a look at as Iowa approaches, and shortly thereafter a number of other primaries, how reporters think about this, how she thinks about this from covering women in politics. And one of the things that happened earlier this week, as you all know, is that there was a lot of back and forth between Senators Sanders and Warren about the matter of whether a woman can be elected as president. So we thought we'd just jump in on this electability matter with Lynn and then go from there. So welcome, Lynn.
Welcome to the two of you, and thank you so much for having me on your show. I appreciate it. And let me get to your question here. Can this electability question really be determined without an election? I mean, this will have an answer. We have two women who are still in the running for the Democratic nomination, Elizabeth Warren, who's a front-runner, Massachusetts senator, and Amy Klobuchar, who is not in a top tier, but has survived earlier rounds, making the Minnesota senator viable, though a longer shot. Amy Klobuchar's fate may well determine how she does in Iowa and New Hampshire, where Warren has the ability to hang on for the March primary states, which includes Illinois on March 17. So this essential question is, doesn't it seem a bit ridiculous that we are still asking it in 2020? Mm-hmm. Can a woman be elected and fill in the blank? Alderman, recorder of deeds, Illinois treasurer, governor, congresswoman. Well, we've had those. Senator, we have those. And now president. So the electorate right now is in a different place than previous because we are in this historic intersection with Donald Trump as president. A few years ago, we all would have agreed no one with Donald Trump's profile had a remote chance of being the nominee, much less the president. So I think we're still in rather very unpredictable times right now. And that doesn't mean, however, that a woman cannot be elected president. The factors that are out there, though, still point to how tough it is for anyone to be president. So Warren has been out campaigning for more than a year. Bernie Sanders is on his second time running for president, yet you have the billionaires Tom Steyer and Michael Bloomberg jumping in late, and because of their money being viable. So to make it more possible for a woman to be president, it would be nice if you had a billionaire Democratic woman out there
who wanted
to. Well, Penny Pritzker is the only one who I know who might be in that category. Seriously, and she has shown no inclination to run for elected office. Clearly, our listeners know J.B. Pritzker, her brother, is the governor of Illinois. But in all seriousness, in order to make it work, you need women donors. You need women with their own money. You need women who have been able to work every possible route to get to the place where they could be potential nominees. Amy Klobuchar and Elizabeth Warren have survived these earlier rounds. Now, Kamala Harris, if you had asked me months ago, would she at least last until Iowa, I would have said yes. But the reasons that she did not survive, I think, have nothing to do with the gender than as much as her campaign and her approach. And if she was able to seize the imagination of the voters to propel her forward. Actually, Kamala Harris had the best early operation in Illinois of any of the presidential candidates. So she was doing everything right. She had some big names behind her. She had a well-organized slate. Yet, even with all that, she thought she decided she could not get the money to go on. Raising money in politics is always harder for women, which kind of gets to the next step when you think through, can a woman be president? You have to have a very, very strong fundraising base. And it's just always been harder for women who might start out with the disadvantage of having to kind of start from zero and putting together an organization. In Kamala Harris's case, though, she already had been a statewide elected official. In California, she was the Attorney General. She was the Senator. It seemed she would have everything she would need to put a national fundraising operation in place. So I don't write off her failure to still be in the race to gender.
So related to that, and then I know Kelly wants to follow up as well, I think one of the things we've learned in the last few cycles is that when women do get to be candidates and show that they're competitive, they do well on the fundraising front, but there is still, going back to that electability matter, these other questions arise about women's candidacy and fitness for various offices. And I'm wondering if you could comment on what you've seen over these last couple cycles about the change in views of women. Certainly so many women being elected to Congress this last time around seems proof that voter attitudes have changed.
Well, I have a little bit of another way of looking at it. I don't know if voters' attitudes have changed. That's really tough. I know that when you have more good candidates, and more of those good candidates are women, right, and those good female candidates know how to work their base, find the like-minded people, find supporters, they could win. There's a phrase in politics called, where political people, operatives, even reporters say, is someone persuadable? Well, sometimes people just aren't. You know, if you're a Trump supporter or Elizabeth Warren supporter, you may just not ever going to change your mind about this. What you do when you have more women run, more women who are very good candidates, they can find the persuadables. They could activate the base of women and men who are like-minded and find them. You don't have to change minds necessarily. You just have to get out your vote. And I think that's what happened in 2018, where you saw so many women elected to Congress, is that like-minded women were activated. And you discovered you didn't have to change minds. You just had to turn out the vote of people who had the same values, cared about the same policies and principles that you cared for.
So as a follow-up to that, really, as a reporter, how do you think through sort of what you're going to look at in a story? You know, I think that's one of the things that so many people are struggling with in general in reporting on politics, is this idea of, you know, there's sort of the back and forth of what happens in a story. There's the themes that emerge from it. You know, how do you look at these things and decide what you're going to pull out of a story, what sorts of questions you want to answer around what's happening?
Well, so let me even take a step back. And it is, when you say, what would I pull out of a story? First, there has to be something that triggers me to make an inquiry, way before the story itself exists. So I have always been very hard news oriented. So as I swim through the day, and I'm undergoing some constant triage, I look for breaking news that is within the area that I cover and I'm responsible for. And that would be things, if there's anything of interest, especially to Illinois, that's always a priority. It's really great when an Illinois story intersects nationally. had a column that posted where I noted that President Trump is talking so much about the Iran hostages after he ordered the drone killing of military leader Soleimani. So that got me thinking. I had covered a Marine hostage back after he was captured in 1979, and I've kept in touch. And I called him and I did a column because I realized that the hostages had never been paid the compensation they were owed all these years later. So that was a nice intersection of, I used an Illinois man to kind of make the example. When we talk about impeachment, if an Illinois member of the House is named to the impeachment managers, I will scramble to get that story up as soon as we can. Maybe by the time our listeners hear this, we'll know the answer. So, in a sense, my first cut is just what's news. And then what is news out of Washington that has an Illinois angle. Campaign finance reports come out. I will look first at people from Illinois and see what the news is. And because I've been around and covered things, I could look at reports, see things, clearly look at totals, follow fundraising. So I don't necessarily have any big secret to breaking news. Every day I make a lot of calls. I get hundreds and hundreds of emails every day.
Right.
I talk to people. People talk to me. I read a bunch of stuff. It is very hard to keep up with everything in this world of Twitter because now there is yet another stream of constant information, some of which is news, that comes out of the blue sometimes. So there is just a lot to keep up on. And then there's enterprise I have, where I have ideas, leads, things I want to look at, people I want to interview, that I go through that. And, this is kind of how I plunge through the day.
So related to your plunging through the day, I have to say, and to our listeners, Lynn and I have been together in this ballpark for many years. And I wonder if you could talk a bit about how you have stayed the course specifically about covering so many different institutions of government, both in Illinois and nationally, and how you've just kind of kept at that, given what you've just commented on and told us about.
Mean why I still am interested in doing what I'm doing?
Well, certainly that's a good question, but from someone who admires your fortitude and discipline, what is it that's enabled you to really keep looking at all these institutions and politicians so closely and analytically?
Well, thank you for that. Why am I doing this? I think part of it is I have a feeling that I'm never done, and there's always one more story to do, and I wonder what it's like to have a sense of being done. If I was a builder and I was building a house and my house was done, or something. But in all seriousness, news is fascinating. All stories. There are so many stories that are different that you just have to learn and often relearn subjects. I covered the impeachment in 1999. I had to go back and reread the rules and old stories and the Andrew Johnson case and look at the Bill Clinton rules and everything because I just forgot them. So it is a challenge that for some reason I get up every morning and I'm still into. And Rebecca and Kelly, I don't have, again, any more secret sauce to that. I am proud that the Sun-Times has been able to still exist. It has kept going in a time where the newspaper business is very difficult, and we're still in business, and they still have me, a Washington correspondent here. When I started in Washington, there were 7 reporters who focused on matters of Illinois, and I am the only one left. So in a sense, I feel an obligation to tell what I can about what's happening here, especially at the intersection of Illinois and Washington.
So you mentioned earlier that your focus is on hard news. So you write news stories, but you also write columns. I wonder, I feel like increasingly there's a blurred line between those out in the world, not specifically in newspapers, but that people don't always understand the difference between a news story and a column and what they're trying to do. And, I imagine it's somewhat of a challenge to be writing both kinds of pieces. Could you talk a little bit about that and sort of how you think through that?
Well, here I am. I have the license of a columnist that I don't often use. The reason I use the column title to be able to explain things to you. I don't have a lot of columns where I say, this is right, this is wrong, here's who should be president, here's who should be, this is a good policy, this is bad, where I make pronouncements or where I take sides. I see my role as an explainer, as taking you to an issue or something happening and just letting you know what happened, or telling something in the form of a story, or occasionally using a first person because it's easier and more effective way to explain what's going on. So with my approach, which is really, I'm a news-based column. Every column I have done is based on something in the news where I bring you facts that you might not be aware of. Now and then, I like to think that I have scoops along the way, which I do, whether perception scoops where we all see the same thing, but I saw it different, and that's where the news was, or just something new that you didn't know before. I did a column on how Mike Bloomberg was bringing his campaign to Illinois and all the people he was hiring to staff up, which was an enormous operation. It was a startup that was born fully started. So because I approach my columnist title in that way, I don't have any of the, I suppose, issues. But for our listeners, there is a difference, especially with columns that appear in the editorial pages of an outlet, whether web or print or on any device, where people who are known to have perspectives, points of view, and slants on the news are more predictable and are telling you things through a certain lens. As I say, I like to explain it mainly, and there's a lot of stuff that needs explaining, I find. So
right.
I find stuff to do all the time.
So speaking of explaining, Lynn, and you and I have, of course, talked about this over the years, and it's on a lot of people's minds today. Can you talk a bit about why, certainly Illinois is a case study for this, why there have been so few women in American politics who have gained executive power, governor, mayor, president, as we've discussed, and how you see, if you do, any shifts over time on what offices women have chosen to run for, how they've gone about it to achieve those executive positions?
Well, in Illinois, on the Republican side, there just haven't been as many women who have burst through to the higher levels, either in state office or even in Congress. We've had more female success on the Democratic side. Now, part of the reason when you look at a job of Illinois governor, people tend to hold on to them. So it's not like there are that many openings. So once someone, J.B. Pritzker, I bet, is not going anywhere for a while. In City Hall, Chicago, where you had Rahm leave after 2 terms, which is pretty rare as Chicago mayors go, there was an opening, and boom, Lori Lightfoot became the mayor of Chicago. So part of this is there aren't that many jobs. The Lori Lightfoot election is the one for the case books. Mm-hmm. How she, by just how she put it together, how it worked, how the long shot became the mayor is one of the fascinating case studies of Chicago politics, and I'm not close enough to it to be able to say exactly what happened and how she won, round 1 and then prevailed. Mm-hmm. The second round against Toni Preckwinkle, I get more because it was easier to analyze that one-on-one. But sometimes the first rule of running for office is there's a lottery slogan I want to invoke, and I don't know who invented it. If you don't buy a ticket, you can't win. Well, if you don't run, you can't be elected. And you can't wait for someone to ask you to be elected.
Right.
And men somehow get that message very easily. They decide to run. Look at all the people who ran for mayor of Chicago. It wasn't like there was a plebiscite before anything to decide who should go. You want to run, pull it together, and run. And traditionally, more men have seen that as a reasonable way to proceed than women.
So I'm just going to push you a little bit on that and then, go back to Kelly. I think, there's under 10 women governors of 50 states. There, just in the last year, the number of women mayors of the 10 largest cities has, I think, climbed up to 3. So while you're absolutely right, I would agree with you that you have to choose to run and go for it and figure out a winning strategy. It's also true that the numbers are so unbalanced. And I guess what I'm asking you, is there anything that you're looking at over the years about women candidates? Are there things they should say differently, or positions they should assert more forcefully, or messages they should articulate?
More and more I think no. You have to the rules of politics are the rules of politics. And no matter what, you have to have a reason you're running. You have to figure out your base. You have to do the fundraising, or you have to be so charismatic that you could exist with small dollar donors and not do fundraising. Look at Elizabeth Warren. The point is there are multiple paths, and you have to figure it out. And when you talk about senators and governors, different states have different stories. And in general, you would think that since more Democratic women are in elected offices, that Democratic states would yield more women as senators and governors. Well, I would have to do a study of it, but you have exceptions to that. So California's had 2 women senators for ages, Barbara Boxer and Dianne Feinstein, and now Kamala Harris and Dianne Feinstein. And Dianne Feinstein has been in there for decades. So I think part of it is you don't have, I think, the gender in problems that people might perceive. I don't think Tammy Duckworth sat around when she wanted to run for Senate and say, I wonder if Illinois will elect a woman. I never asked her that specifically, but I think whatever factors were going into her decision to run, it's that, well, Mark Kirk is vulnerable. I'm already a House member. I have a history here. I have military service. Everyone knows of my sacrifice. And I'm going to take the risk of losing my House seat that was pretty safe for her at the time, and do it. So what was in the ingredients to her run? Willing to take risk, having a resume, convinced she could do the fundraising, assessing the political turf out there, being in a basically blue state that would give her or any nominee a running start over Kirk when she first got elected. So I am not, weak candidate is a weak candidate. I don't care what the gender is. And I have a sense that in 2020, there have been enough women elected that you have multiple models to look at. If you're younger and with kids, you have now role models of women that run who still have to be or are or it's just how it is, the primary caregiver to their family. People are now finding new ways to figure this stuff out. And maybe that will help inject more women in the system. But Rebecca and Kelly, there are enough women around to surface into these Senate and governor jobs, but it's not like there are so many openings all the time. The best chances, of course, to get in are at the very most local offices, And I think you've seen this in Chicago City Council.
Sure.
There's just more women than there were when Rebecca and I started out.
Yeah. So what is your advice then for women who are looking at running for office, but then also your advice for any budding journalists that we have listening?
My advice to any budding journalists is pretty standard. You have to know how to write, tell a story simply. You have to know how to get facts right in a story. And if you can't get that basic stuff done, then you can't really proceed in the craft, no matter what your politics are, no matter where you think you might want to be as a journalist. If you cannot get a certain, if you can't just cover a simple story well, then you may be in trouble. I sometimes say to journalists, if you can't cover your condo board meeting, then you can't cover Congress, because it's sometimes the same elements. Things are proposed, somebody proposed it, you have to get the name spelled right, what does it mean, you got to explain it. And to elected officials, well, it's the stuff I've been talking about. It's not really my advice, it's the basics of politics. If you decide to run, have a reason, have policies you care about, or a platform you want, or a project that is a reason why you want to run, and then you do the hard work of figuring how to finance your campaign. If you're rich and can self-fund, then you are a few steps ahead of everyone, because you could start out, if you choose, with professional help, and you can get off and running. The campaigns take a lot of work, take a bit of your soul, and what everybody has is time. They just have to decide if running for office is something that they want to use the time they have for.
Mm-hmm. And on that note, I think Kelly and I want to thank you, Lynn, for being so frank and sharing with us on a number of fronts about your views on women running for office and women winning. And we're now all off and running into this primary season in earnest, so don't be surprised if we call you back.
Okay. Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome.
The Vote Her In segment is a collaboration of Two Broads Talking Politics and author Rebecca Sive. Our theme song is called Are You Listening, off of the album Elephant-Shaped Trees by the band Immunuri, and we're using it with permission of the band. Our logo and other original artwork is by Matthew Weflin and was created for use by this podcast. You can contact us at twobroadstalkingpolitics@gmail.com or on Twitter or Facebook at Two Broads Talk. You can find all of our episodes at twobroadstalkingpolitics.com or anywhere podcasts are found.